American Airlines Flight 191. American Airlines Flight 191 was a scheduled domestic passenger flight on May 25, 1979. The aircraft was departing from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport with the destination of Los Angeles. On board were 208 passengers and 13 crew members. The aircraft began its takeoff roll under normal conditions. Weather was clear and there was no reported issues during taxi or the initial acceleration. At rotation speed, the aircraft lifted off the runway and began its initial climb. Shortly after liftoff, the left engine and its supporting pylon separated from the wing. The separation of the engine caused significant structural and system damage. As the engine detached, it damaged hydraulic lines and electrical wiring located in the wing. This resulted in the loss of critical systems, including those responsible for controlling the leading edge slats on the left wing. The slats on the left wing retracted automatically while the slats on the right wing remained extended. This asymmetric configuration created a significant imbalance in lift between the two wings. As the aircraft continued to climb at a relatively low airspeed, the left wing experienced an aerodynamic stall. This caused the aircraft to roll to the left. The crew attempted to maintain control, but the loss of lift on the left wing and the low altitude limited the available recovery options. The aircraft rolled further to the left, exceeded its banked angle limits, and descended rapidly. It crashed into an open field near the airport shortly after takeoff. The impact and post-crash fire destroyed the aircraft entirely. The investigation determined that the primary cause of the accident was the separation of the left engine and pylon assembly due to structural damage. The damage had actually occurred during prior maintenance. Instead of removing the engine and pylon separately, maintenance personnel had used a procedure in which both were removed together using a forklift. This method introduced stress to the pylon attachment points, leading to the formation of cracks. Over time, these cracks propagated and weakened the structure. During the takeoff of Flight 191, the weakened attachment failed, resulting in the engine separation. The investigation also identified a design vulnerability in the DC-10. The routing of hydraulic and electrical systems made them susceptible to damage from the engine separation. Additionally, the loss of slap position indicated in the cockpit meant that the crew was not aware that the left wing slats had retracted, which affected their ability to diagnose the situation accurately. Following the accident, the DC-10 fleet was temporarily grounded for inspection. Maintenance procedures were revised to ensure compliance with manufacturer guidelines. Structural inspections of engine pylons were enhanced and design modifications were implemented to improve system redundancy and damage tolerance. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 was an international passenger flight on March 3, 1974. The aircraft was flying from Istanbul to London with a scheduled stop in Paris. The accident occurred shortly after departure from Paris Airport, on board with 335 passengers and 11 crew members. The aircraft departed Paris under normal conditions and began its climb. The weather was not a contributing factor, and there was no reported issues during takeoff or the initial phase of the flight. The aircraft climbed to approximately 12,000 feet when a failure occurred in the rear cargo compartment. The aircraft's aft cargo door separated from the fuselage during the climb. The door was designed to open outwards, which required a secure locking mechanism to maintain structural integrity under cabin pressurization. In this case, the locking system was not properly engaged, allowing the door to fail under pressure. The separation of the cargo door caused rapid decompression within the aircraft. The pressure differential led to the collapse of a portion of the cabin floor above the cargo compartment. This structural failure resulted in damage to control cables routed beneath the floor, which connected the cockpit controls to the aircraft control surfaces. As a result of the damages to these control systems, the flight crew lost the ability to control the aircraft. The aircraft entered an uncontrolled descent shortly after the failure. Due to the loss of control authority and the low altitude, recovery was not possible. The aircraft crashed into the Hermonville forest northeast of Paris. The impact destroyed the aircraft and all 346 people on board were killed. The investigations determined that the primary cause of the accident was the failure of the cargo door due to the improper latching. The design of the DC-10 cargo door allowed it to appear closed even when the locking mechanism was not fully secured. This created a risk that the door could fail under pressurization during the flight. The investigation also noted that a similar cargo door issue had occurred in a previous DC-10 incident in 1972. Recommendations had been made to address this design vulnerability, but the modifications implemented were not sufficient to fully eliminate the risk. Air New Zealand Flight 901. Air New Zealand Flight 901 was a non-scheduled sightseeing flight operated by a McDonnell Douglas DC-10 on November 28, 1979. The flight departed from Auckland, New Zealand, and was planned to conduct a round-trip journey over Antarctica before returning to Auckland the same day. On board were 237 passengers and 20 crew members. The aircraft departed Auckland under normal conditions and proceeded south towards Antarctica. Weather conditions en route were stable and there were no reported technical issues during the initial phase of the flight. The flight was conducted using a pre-programmed navigation route that had been used on prior Antarctic sightseeing flights. Prior to departure, the coordinates defining the flight path had been updated. The change resulted in a shift of the programmed route. However, this update was not clearly communicated to the flight crew, who believed they were following the same route as earlier flights. As the aircraft approached the Antarctic region, it began descending to a lower altitude to allow passengers to observe the landscape. Environmental conditions in the area include a phenomenon known as a whiteout, where the visual distinction between the ground and the sky is reduced or eliminated due to uniform light reflections from the snow and cloud cover. Under these conditions, terrain features can be difficult to identify visually. The aircraft continued its descent while maintaining a controlled flight path. Based on available information, the crew did not have a clear visual indication of rising terrain ahead. The aircraft's navigation systems indicated that it was on course according to the program route. At 12:49 local time, the aircraft collided with the slopes of Mount Erebus on Ross Island, Antarctica. The impact destroyed the aircraft and all 257 people on board were killed. The investigation determined that the accident was a controlled flight into terrain. The aircraft was fully functional and under control at the time of the impact. Contributing factors included the change in flight path coordinates, the lack of clear communication of the change to the flight crew, and the visual conditions that reduced the crew's ability to detect terrain. The investigation also highlighted the limitations of navigation and terrain awareness systems available at the time. The crew relied on the program route and visual cues, both of which were affected by the conditions present during the flight. Following the accident, changes were made to improve flight planning procedures, particularly with regard to ensuring the crews were fully informed of route changes. Additional emphasis was placed on terrain awareness and the risk associated with operating environments with limited visual references. The accident also contributed to the broader adoption of ground proximity warning systems in commercial aircrafts. These systems provide alerts when aircraft are at risk of colliding with terrain and have since become standard in aviation. United Airlines Flight 232. On July 19, 1989, United Airlines Flight 232 departed Denver, Colorado, bound for Chicago. It was a routine domestic flight carrying 296 people. The crew was experienced, the aircraft was functioning normally, and the first part of the journey unfolded without incident. At cruising altitude, the flight settled into a calm, uneventful rhythm, exactly what passengers and crew would expect on a short trip across the United States. Approximately an hour into the flight, a loud explosion suddenly echoed through the aircraft, followed by a violent shudder. The tail-mounted engine, known as number 2 engine, had suffered a catastrophic failure. Inside the engine, a titanium fan disc had fractured apart, sending high-speed fragments outwards with a tremendous force. These fragments didn't just destroy the engine itself. They severed all 3 of the aircraft's hydraulic systems, which were routed through the tail section. In modern aircraft, hydraulic systems are critical. They control the ailerons, the elevators, and rudder, every major surface that allows a pilot to maneuver the aircraft. Multiple systems exist precisely to provide redundancy, ensuring that if one fails, the others can take over. But on Flight 232, all three systems were lost at once. In a single moment, the aircraft lost nearly all conventional means of control. Inside the cockpit, the crew was faced with a situation that they had never trained for. The crew quickly realized that the aircraft was no longer responding to normal control inputs. The yoke felt ineffective and the pedals provided no response. The aircraft began to drift, then roll, then oscillate unpredictably. They were still airborne, but they were no longer truly flying in the traditional sense. With no checklist to guide them, the crew began to improvise. They discovered that while the control surfaces were no longer functional, the two wing-mounted engines were still operational. By adjusting the thrust between the left and right engines, they could influence the aircraft direction. Increasing power on one side would cause the aircraft to turn, while reducing it could help stabilize the motion. It was an imprecise and unstable method of control, but it was the only option they had. As they experimented with this technique, the aircraft entered a continuous cycle of oscillation. It would climb, then descend, then bank, requiring constant adjustments to prevent it from spiraling out of control. During this time, another pilot on board, Captain Dennis Fitch, who was a DC training instructor, offered his assistance and joined the cockpit. He took over managing the throttles, allowing the rest of the crew to focus on navigation and communication. During their efforts, the aircraft was slowly losing altitude. The crew needed to find a place to land, and they began steering towards the CO Gateway Airport in Iowa. Air traffic control cleared the airspace and prepared for an emergency arrival. On the ground, rescue crews were positioned themselves along the runway, aware that the incoming aircraft was in a critical and highly unstable condition. Inside the cabin, flight attendants prepared passengers for an emergency landing. The situation was becoming increasingly clear, and the mood shifted from a routine calm to growing tension. The aircraft movements were erratic, and the descent was far from controlled. As Flight 232 approached Sioux City, the difficulty of the situation became even more apparent. The aircraft could not be properly aligned with the runway. It was ascending too fast with limited ability to adjust its path. The oscillations continued, making it nearly impossible to maintain a steady approach. The crew did everything they could, using engine thrust to guide the aircraft towards the runway environment. At approximately 4 p.m., the aircraft reached the airport, and the right wing dropped, and the aircraft began to roll. The nose pitched downwards, and the descent became uncontrollable. Moments later, the DC-10 struck the ground. The impact was severe, with the right wing hitting first and igniting a massive fireball as fuel was released. The aircraft broke apart and tumbled across the runway, coming to rest in multiple sections. From the outside, the crash appeared to be unsurvivable. Yet, in a remarkable outcome, 185 people had survived, with only 111 people losing their lives. But the fact that so many had survived a crash of this magnitude was extraordinary. It was a direct result of the crew's actions and their ability to maintain partial control and the determination to bring the aircraft down in the best way possible under impossible circumstances. The investigation that followed traced the origin of the failure to a microscopic defect in the engine's fan disc. This flaw had been present since manufacturing and had gone undetected during inspections. Over time, stress caused the defect to grow until it eventually led to the disc's catastrophic failure. When it broke apart, the resulting damage to the hydraulic systems left the aircraft without its primary means of control. The accident exposed a critical vulnerability in the DC-10's design. While the aircraft had multiple hydraulic systems for redundancy, they were all routed through a common area, making them susceptible to a single point of failure. Following the crash, changes were made to improve system separation and ensure that no single event could disable all control systems simultaneously. Advances were also made in inspection techniques to detect microscopic defects in engine components before they could lead to failure. Also, sorry to interrupt this, but I would really appreciate it if you guys would like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. And with that said, let's get straight into the next story. UTA Flight 772. UTA Flight 772 was an international passenger flight on September 19, 1989. The aircraft was flying from Brazzaville, Republic of the Congo, to Paris, France, with scheduled stops in Najima, Chad, and Marseille. The accident occurred during the segment between Najima and Paris. On board were 156 passengers and 14 crew members, totaling 170 people. The aircraft departed Najima under normal conditions and climbed to its cruising altitude of approximately 35,000 feet. Weather conditions along the route were stable and there were no reported technical issues during the initial phase of the flight, and communication with air traffic control was routine. Approximately 46 minutes after departure, contact with the aircraft was lost. There was no distress call or indication of an emergency prior to the loss of radar and radio communication. The sudden disappearance of the aircraft prompted the search and rescue operations in the region of northern Niger. Wreckage was eventually located in the remote area of the Sahara Desert. The debris field was widely scattered over several kilometers, indicating that the aircraft had broken apart in mid-air. The distribution of the wreckage suggested as an in-flight structural breakup rather than an impact-related disintegration. Investigators examined the recovered wreckage and determined the breakup was caused by an explosive device. Evidence indicated the explosion originated in the forward cargo hold area. Damage patterns on sections of the fuselage showed outward deformation consistent with the internal blast. Further analysis confirmed the presence of explosive residue on recovered components. The investigation concluded that a suitcase containing the explosive device had been loaded onto the aircraft prior to departure, and the device detonated at cruising altitude, causing rapid structural failure. The explosion resulted in immediate decompression and loss of structural integrity. The aircraft broke apart shortly after detonation. Due to the altitude and nature of the damage, there was no opportunity for the crew to respond or regain control of the aircraft. All 170 people on board were killed. The investigation involved multiple international agencies and focused on identifying how the explosive device was introduced onto the aircraft. At the time, baggage screening procedures were less advanced than current standards, and the ability to detect concealed explosive devices was limited. Anyway, that's all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this short list of the worst DC-10 disasters. If you want to see more videos and more lists of the worst accidents on a particular type of aircraft or airline, please let me know in the comment section down below. Also, these videos are uploaded early on Patreon. You can check out down below as well. And with all that said, like always, stay safe, and I will see you all in the next video.